Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. You're watching TechStrong TV for today, Tuesday, June 2nd. Welcome to the show, folks. If you watched yesterday's show, you know it was a great way to kick off our week. We have this Thursday, of course, is TechStrong Con, our major event that we kind of got the notion for when this whole COVID thing kicked in. We all began working from home. And I just feel like I don't want to bring politics into our TechStrong TV thing, but so many of us are really shaken right now, hurting right now with what's going on here in the U.S. primarily, but it's catching on in other places. We're in a tinderbox where people have been kind of locked in place or sheltered in place for 2.5 months, and it doesn't take many sparks to start a fire. And, some of our speakers for TechStrong Con have written to us that they want to kind of change a little bit of the focus of their talks to address maybe some of what's going on in the world, in our world around us. And we encouraged it, frankly, right? Because that was the idea behind TechStrong Con, is that though things are moving, let's call it a liquid situation around us, tech goes on. And we do what we can in technology, and hopefully we do it for the right reasons and to try to make things better. Right, and I know that's one of the big things I love about being in technology is to try to make things better. Right, make a better world, allow us to do better things. It doesn't always work that way, of course, but anyway, the bottom line is, no matter where you are, thanks for joining us. We hope you're safe. We hope you're sound, and we're going to try to escape all that for the next 2 hours or so. We're bringing you some great interviews on some great technology news and happenings, points of view, and thanks for joining us. So, in addition to TechStrong Con being this Thursday, you can register at techstrongcon.com. Bunch of other stuff going on. There's actually like 3 or 4 great DevOps conferences this month. We got an article on that we featured on DevOps.com. You should check out. But let me tell you what we've got in store for you today. First of all, I am happy to introduce you to a new company for our audience called Envisium, and I'm going to be speaking with their CEO and founder, Jack Menino. Turns out Jack grew up just a few miles away from me in the Queens area of New York City, around Kennedy Airport. And Jack's probably a little younger than me, but we had a lot in common there, and it was good speaking and meeting Jack. It's my conversation with him. And then after Jack, I'm really happy to be joined by my friend Michelle McLean. Michelle, of course, is a VP at StackRox. We have a really good interview, a good session, Michelle and I, where we talk about sort of the parallels between the infrastructure development that we've seen, culminating now in Kubernetes and cloud native technology, and how security has responded and paralleled that evolutionary track. So Michelle and I get into that and how security kind of really works within that Kubernetes framework. Then, staying on security kind of stream of consciousness, I'm happy to have Susan St. Clair from Checkmarx on. Checkmarx just did an interesting survey. They didn't survey security people or DevOps people or even tech people. They surveyed consumers about how do they feel about application security and how important is AppSec to them. And some of the answers may surprise you. So we speak with Susan St. Clair about that. And then we're going to go back to the vaults from the archives, and I've got an interview we did with Charlie Betts over at Forrester, who's their DevOps consultant. This is from DevOps World, Jenkins World in San Francisco last summer, so not quite a year old. And let's see how Charlie's thoughts have held up, a year later. Who would have guessed what happened in the year? Then I'll be back on here with the news. headlines from around our sites. And then it's Tuesday, so it's our friend John Willis's day. And John has a great interview today with Steve. I'm going to mispronounce Steve's last name, Truaget, and John can tell you all about that one. And then we have Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. And Charlene has some interesting information today. And then we'll go over to the analyst corner with Mitch, hear from Mitchell Ashley. And then we'll be back to wrap things up. So a great day in store for you here on TechStrong TV. Thanks for joining us. We're going to take a commercial break and we'll be right back.
Tech is strong. We may be working from home, but tech goes on. Tech will continue to collaborate. Tech will continue to communicate. Tech is strong. Join us for TechStrong Con, June 4th, 12 hours strong, TechStrong. Featuring John Bacha-Galupe Willis, Shannon Leitz, William Hurley, Jasmine James, Kat Swatell, Cornelia Davis, James Wickett, Courtney Kistler, Damon Edwards. Live Q&A with speakers, exhibit halls, and more. Free, but register before spots fill at techstrongcon.com.
All right, as I mentioned at the top of the show, our first interview today is with Jack Menino, CEO, founder of Invisium. Invisium has been doing security training in the AppSec space for many years, but with everything going on, COVID-related and working from home remote, they're really taking virtual security training to remote environments in a big way. Turned out when I met Jack, he grew up not far from where I grew up in southeastern Queens, out near Kennedy Airport. And so it was interesting, just going over kind of places and people and stuff from the area. But Jack's also got a good take on what's going on security training-wise and what we could do. I think you'll find his interview very interesting. And check out Invisium. So here's my interview with Jack Menino, CEO of Invisium.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel back here on TechStrong TV. And in this segment, I'm happy to be joined by a fellow Queens person who also escaped the borough, Jack Menino from Invisium. Jack, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Great to have you today.
Thanks for being here with us. Hey, Jack, I don't think we've ever covered Invisium on like Security Boulevard or DevOps.com, Container Journal, or TechStrong. So why don't we start with that? Would you mind kind of just giving us a little background on your company and yourself?
Sure. So Invisium is an application and software security company founded in 2009. We essentially help secure web, mobile, cloud, and a lot of cloud native migrations these days. So it's a lot of fun just kind of seeing how people build software and how it's evolved over the years. And obviously we've all evolved in step. We also build software. We have an on-demand online training stack. It's called DevSec Mentor, and it allows software developers, engineers, and essentially anybody in the stack to learn security at their own pace. There's some gamification, but we're very focused on fundamentals, and we're really focused on teaching people security in a repeatable way. And what we found is that our material and just kind of our approach, we've used decades of collective wisdom from our team, research into frameworks and languages. So we're really focused on teaching people how to write code and be that kind of mentor that's standing over your shoulder while you're doing it. So obviously seeing people moving these days quite a bit towards online training. People don't want to be in a room with other humans at this point. And at the same time, a lot of companies still have to exist. Unfortunately, this has been pretty hard for some companies, but in reality, quite a bit of the world is still moving on. And people need to find new ways to, one, keep their engineering and security teams engaged, learning new things, and doing things to keep the business safe. And so, given the current dynamic, we certainly have to be very creative with how we do those things. So at a 50,000-foot view, that's what Invisium is about. As
Very
myself,
cool. Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, good. What about yourself?
I've been in security about 20 years. I've done a bit of development, a bit of penetration testing, Obviously, management is, I guess, a part of being a CEO. So I've done a little bit of everything and kind of seen things from different perspectives. So I feel like that's one of the things that's helped me quite a bit in my career, and to actually be able to talk the talk at this point.
Excellent, man. So just to be clear, Jack, I mean, look, with COVID, we certainly can't be in rooms with anyone, but you guys had sort of this DevSec training, SaaS-based thing. You guys had done this before the whole COVID situation popped up, and now, since COVID, you've relaunched it, freshened it up, or just kind of updated it. What's the story?
So we've done a pretty significant rewrite of the initial product. So we've actually had it out there for about 2 years. We're taking it to quite a bit bigger audience and market at this point. So we've pretty much rewritten the stack from the ground up, lightning fast. Does some really interesting things under the hood. So yeah, we're really interested to see how the market and our users react to it.
Absolutely. So, we were talking off camera, and we got into the whole subject about a lot of training, especially a lot of tech training, but especially security training has gone the way, like gamified, if you will, right? We haven't quite gotten to first person shoot up security training yet, but it's coming. But seriously, it started, I noticed it probably 10 years ago with phishing, right? Where it became much more, if you could play a game, catch the fish, right? It really caught on. And you know what? My kids loved it, Jack. And it was great to teach my kids a little something about phishing and how to be smart about not clicking on email. But it's a different story when we try to do something like application security. And I'm not belittling phishing and how important, anti-phishing training is. But AppSec and especially for developers working, and making more secure. I'm not saying you can't have fun, and there shouldn't maybe be some gamification to it, but it's not a game at the end of the day. Interested in your thoughts on that.
Sure. I think gamification makes it fun. It makes it engaging, and it gets people to the table. But then there's also a fine balance between, how much do you spend time on the gamification side of things, and how much do you actually dig into, essentially the fundamentals and the depth that maybe people require, right? So, just across the board, whether it's been application security or phishing, I mean, I've seen, good solutions that I think, in my opinion, get it right. And I see some that have, they've done a lot of eye candy, but there's really not any depth there, right? And I do think there are different consumers of these things. Phishing is generally done in a lot of organizations where it's either a check mark or something that's a part of a program, but they include non-technologists in these things, right? So to engage non-technologists in technology, I think a great level of gamification works. When you're trying to teach, highly technical people, which have an incredible amount of domain knowledge and specialization, you have to be careful with how much you gamify it and how much you focus on giving them the context and the data they need, in a non-gamey way, right? So there's things that I believe you can gamify and increase stickiness with, and then I'd argue that there's some level of gamification that could actually be distracting at some point. So that's my take.
I agree with you, man. So, Jack, let's talk about the kind of training you're delivering. Let's dive, because our audience are all DevOps, and cyber cloud native people, right? These are your audience. This is your audience. Give them a better feel for the kinds of things that they learned in the course that you're offering here.
Sure. So we have courses around secure development for a variety of languages and frameworks. We'll be introducing some things around infrastructure as code, cloud native, where pretty much people working in different parts of the stack can find things that are important to them, right? So in a lot of our security training, we've either focused on just the developers or we focused on pen testers a lot of the times, right? So the people that break stuff and the people that build stuff. But in reality, as we know, development's changed quite a bit. It's not just the coders that are involved in the SDLC at this point. Right. DevOps and other things, GitOps, right? We behave very differently at this point. So it's really important to kind of, our opinion is we kind of need to reimagine how do we train people on different parts of the stack. whether that's you're trying to do secure CI/CD, container orchestration, or write good Java and Python code.
Absolutely. So one of the challenges in that area, though, so I'm one of the co-founders of the DevOps Institute, right? So we do, I call it more soft training in that it's not tool specific. It's more the general DevOps foundation, DevSecOps, DevOps leader, stuff like that. But one of the challenges we see is sort of that difference between, hey, I use GitLab and I want GitLab training, or I want Jenkins training, or GitHub, or whatever the particular, so very tool specific training, right? And versus more, hey, I want to be a CI/CD engineer or DevOps, part of the DevOps team, and so I need that, but and security's part of that. So I need security for a CI/CD pipeline training, let's call it. And I'm not saying you guys offer this. I'm just, making it up. That's very different than saying I want to learn how to do CI/CD using, let's say, GitLab. How do you, where do you draw the line in the kinds of training you're offering?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So we have a mix of, really specific language and technology, so very specific things around Java, Python, specific frameworks. So very specific. And, you obviously, if you fix it in Spring, you don't necessarily fix it the same way in Django, right? So whereas, there are some concepts that, can be a little bit more universal, but then you get into, there's a million different, CI/CD systems at this point. Cloud native stuff, right? We're seeing, Jenkins X. It's not just Jenkins, it's Spinnaker. There's so many different tools, right? And so if you get too nitty gritty and focused on the tools, then you get away from the concepts. So there is kind of, I guess, it's a challenge, especially with a very technical team of people that, love technology. It's the constant battle on our side to make sure that we keep that reined in, and we don't just cover every technology in the world, because then it's all diluted. So in reality, we see, engineering teams these days, one of the perks of, living in a microservices world and just, leveraging modern architecture is that you can be a polyglot. You can pick up the best tool for the job and get started. And so, we understand that, but then at the same time, there's only so many technologies that are worth investing the time, money, and energy in, building first-class solutions around. So,
sure, absolutely, man. So now this is a SaaS-based program. Is it aimed so I'm just a developer and I want to do it. I'm a one person and that's it. Or is it aimed more like, hey, my company I need to have my DevOps team or my dev team, one of my dev teams on this. So we're going to do it as a team. So is it individual based, team based, both? How is it? It is both.
Yeah, so the individual aspect, if you want to sign up and go through the material, subscribe, that's perfectly fine. Once you get on with the team and an enterprise solution, you get a lot more metrics, you get a lot more policy configuration that you can do. For example, set really fine-grained curriculums, times things are due, set various things you can measure, so things you want to see get better over time. And over time, we're going to integrate with more solutions to be able to give you, more data from a lot more disparate data points, right? So I'm of the belief that, if we just count vulnerabilities, it's the absolute worst way to measure if we got better. I always say to people, they say, well, what if we didn't have any vulnerabilities committed in the past 6 months? They say, well, what if your lead developer died in a plane crash, right? And you had no one to write code for 6 months. So we believe, there's a lot of other things to measure, right? Did the framework we migrated to solve a bunch of things? Did we actually not write any code? Did we reduce code? Did we, decompose this monolithic application as microservices? So there's a lot of different, things that can feed into, are you actually getting better? Because that's one of the questions we get asked all the time. And sometimes I think it's a loaded question because if you don't have all those data points and you're just counting things like vulnerabilities, it's not actually useful. So when we end up having groups on, the whole goal is that this data set gets more valuable over time, can integrate with more points across your SDLC.
Excellent, man. All right. So Jack, we kind of touched on it a little bit in the beginning, but you know, this COVID situation is changed a lot of business models, a lot of businesses, a lot of the ways people are doing even training for AppSec and DevSec and so forth. How has COVID influenced, you know, the program you guys are rolling out?
So obviously it's increased demand for remote and self-paced training solutions. So we've, over the years, done instructor-led in-person, virtual training, and we also have our SaaS solution. Obviously there's been no instructor-led training this year, so every one of our clients thankfully doesn't want us there, and obviously we don't want to put our people at risk either. And so what we're coming up with now is that more people want some kind of self-paced training. And the interesting thing is that as we see headcount starting to get constrained at places, right? So once upon a time, people could take all the developers, put them in a room for 2 days, talk about security, and then move on. But now, you know, teams are, they're not getting headcount, they've lost headcount. So it's not quite as easy as just to kind of take your whole engineering team, not have them write code or deal with open tickets for 2 days. So people definitely need, you know, creative solutions at this point that are going to get people, you know, close to that same experience with a person there, but obviously in a self-paced way, and that's what we're trying to do. So,
excellent. So certainly the way people are consuming the training is different, right? It you know, it's all SaaS based at this point. It's all self-paced. I imagine people are doing it at night or whenever, right? They get tired of binging Netflix, and it's a good thing they get some training. Is it still being paid for by the companies, you think, though, or you think people are doing it? Look, man, you know what? I got a job today. I may not have a job tomorrow. I'm going to hone up on my skills. I want to make sure I'm on top of my game.
Yeah, truthfully, I've seen both, I think, at this point, where there's companies that are still continuing to invest in those things because they're looking on, you know, a 3 to 5 year outlook, and they understand where they're going to end up. And there's a lot of organizations that they are cutting back on things like training budgets, right? So when the discretionary funds kind of dry up and things have to get done, here's the mission critical stuff. Here's things like training. And then it really depends, right? How much do you value, you know, those things being introduced into your products going forward? So it's not quite as easy as, you know, just saying we're going to cut the budget. But, you know, training certainly in some organizations is the first thing to go, you know, when the money dries up. So it's a reality of the care market.
Now, so do you have a lot of people paying for it out of their own pocket, you think?
Not as much in individuals. We still see, I mean, quite a bit of companies still looking for this stuff, actively looking for, you know, vendors and interesting products. So we admittedly haven't seen, I guess, the slowdown side of that, at least from companies. Now, individuals, yeah, I can't say, you know, in 6 months, you know, when unemployment stayed kind of high, you know, our individuals going to have that same money to invest in themselves, hopefully, but we'll see.
I mean, it's probably money well spent, to tell you the truth. You know what else occurs to me, Jack? Is U.S., like percentage U.S. versus rest of the world, Europe, EMEA, and maybe Asia. Because it's SaaS, right? People, makes no difference where they're located, really. So are you getting a lot of international folks signing up?
So we've worked with some international groups. We do work with a lot of American companies that have, you know, a global footprint, and teams in every single time zone. So the short answer is, yeah, we've worked with some international teams, but we haven't done translations to other languages yet. So that's further down the roadmap is internationalization of things. Absolutely.
Absolutely, man. And then beyond education, tell us more about what your firm does.
Sure. So we do essentially education, security testing and assessments, and we have various SDLC services, whether that's helping you bootstrap and get a security program off the ground, helping you successfully migrate to modern architecture. If you want to lift and shift, you know, the monoliths that have been sitting in your data center for a decade and a half, and move them to, you know, AWS and Kubernetes, we're the people that help you kind of, you know, migrate and architect things securely. And if you're building a new solution, we can also help you with architecture and design type things as well. so you can actually ship new features with security in mind. So we have a mix of education, consultative services, and security testing.
Excellent, man. Good stuff. And Jack, you're located in D.C. Is the company headquartered there as well then? Or in the D.C. area?
The DC area, yep.
Very cool. Long way from Queens, huh?
Couple hour train ride, yeah.
Yeah, actually for you it is a couple if you want to take a train these days. All right, man. Hey, you know what we didn't mention though? Where can people get more information? What's the website?
Sure. They can go to Invisium.com and look at our training solutions, and there's some stuff to read there.
Just so we don't mess up for people watching, how do you spell that?
NVISIUM.com.
Okay. Excellent. Hey, Jack Menino from Queens and Invisium. Thanks for being our guest, man, on TechStrong TV today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Enjoy. All right. This is Alan Schimmel. You just heard from Jack Menino. We're going to be right back on TechStrong TV with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Back here in the studio, you know, one of the things that I really pride myself on is the kind of long-term relationships I formed in the technology space over the last 30 years. And, you know, companies may change, logos may change, missions even sometimes change, but people kind of stay. And we're always adding new people to the network, but, you know, you count on your go-to friends. And our next guest is one of my go-to friends. Her and I first met actually as competitors back in the NAC war days when NAC was quite the thing. So that had to be around 2004, 2005. And we stayed pretty friendly ever since then. And as things develop, you know, you stay friends and you both stay current with what's going on. More than that, I mean, why do you stay friends? It's not just a shared interest in technology, though that's part of it. I think also part of it, though, is that you can respect the intellectual integrity and the stimulation of having good conversation on topics that are, you know, that you care about. Now, we're not talking world politics or world peace or medicine, but, you know, this next guest, Michelle McLean, Michelle and I have been talking about security-related issues together for going on now probably 15 years. And of course, she's now VP at StackRox, has been for a while, and we feature StackRox a bit on our show, primarily because I like to talk to Michelle. Anyway, Michelle and I had a really good conversation in this session, talk about kind of the parallels of evolving infrastructure stacks to security's response and use of them. Kind of culminating around how security is being integrated and why it needs to be integrated into Kubernetes. So here's my conversation with Michelle McLean from StackRox.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone. Thanks for joining us on this interview session for TechStrong TV. I'm really happy to be joined by one of my friends from the security world. Well, now also from the cloud native world, but I knew her before that. My friend Michelle McLean, VP over at StackRox. Hey, Michelle, how are you?
I'm doing great today, Alan. Thanks so much for the chat.
You know, we were talking and talking. I just noticed your shirt here. Giving K8s a security complex, StackRox. I like it. That's pretty cool. Good stuff. So, Michelle, we were going to talk today about sort of parallel lines, right? Parallels between how we've seen the path we've seen infrastructure take,
Yeah.
right? And how, in some ways, the path that security is taking and must follow kind of parallels that infrastructure journey as well.
Yeah.
And why don't you, set the table for it?
Sure. So we've seen with cloud native this shift in focus in the infrastructure world, right? We started, if you think about it, right, containers preceded Kubernetes by about 5 years. And containers were, a great way to innovate fast, a great way to get developer independence, a great way to build an abstraction layer. And it enabled a whole bunch of benefits moving to containers, right? We had portability and we had independence amongst different people working on different parts of code, and all of that was great. But we hit sort of a wall where people realized that if you were going to get serious about this and really have microservices architectures at any kind of scale, then you needed an orchestration method to manage all those containers. And we saw the creation of a bunch of different orchestrators, and then you fast forward in time and Kube's one, right? And on the infrastructure side, it's the heart and soul of everything, right? This is the lifeblood of how you run your infrastructure today. And you couldn't do anything at any kind of meaningful scale, at any kind of meaningful pace without Kubernetes as the heart of it. And all of your, if you think about the notion of moving towards infrastructure as code, Kube is a big piece of that, and it's kind of the brain of that. We're seeing a very similar evolution on the security side. Why did we need Kube on the infrastructure side? We needed it for scale, for automation, to make, get rid of the human element and move at this pace that we needed to move at. Exactly the same principles apply on the security front. If you're going to do security for cloud native infrastructure, then just as you anchor everything on the infrastructure side in Kubernetes, you need to anchor everything on the security side in Kubernetes. And
you need
have your
that central
policies
point.
live there. Yeah, you need the central point, you need the automation, you need the scale. And so that was kind of the aha moment that we had several years ago, and made the decision to go all in on Kube. Because the other thing is that Kube got a lot smarter about security over time. It's just not the easiest to implement. It's not on by default. So there's a lot of things you got to do, but it's got a lot of native capabilities to take advantage of in a security context.
Got it. So I'm kind of reminded that in many ways it mimics nature, right? And in nature, we see patterns repeating over and over in nature. And what you just described about the container infrastructure journey or evolution, we could make a similar case for the cloud itself, right? So you had the hypervisor, right? Now, hypervisors, when I first became aware of them, it had to be the late 90s, early 2000, right? You had open source before VMware even.
Yes.
Right? You had Zen and some of the other early hypervisors that allowed you to virtualize, but when you think back, really, the virtualization aspect, mainframes were doing this, right?
Right, absolutely. That
Years before
nature
that.
abhors a vacuum. Nature loves abstraction layers.
I guess it does.
Time and time again, that's been the right path.
But so the whole cloud thing itself follows this same sort of evolutionary journey where you have your hypervisor, which is I'm going to tell you is akin to the container in the infrastructure.
You get that analogy a lot. Yeah,
and then you couldn't really have the cloud until you sort of had cloud orchestration, if you will, right? And VMware maybe, and some of the early like open source cloud, not OpenShift. I'm drawing a blank because I'm old, but some of the like private cloud they were open source that people were running,
like OpenStack.
Foundry, OpenStack. That's right.
Yeah.
OpenShift. I was thinking it's OpenStack. You're going to be this old too one day, so don't make fun. But and then you had things like OpenStack that started bringing the whole thing together into a distribution, if you will,
Right.
into a cohesive thing. And then, of course, AWS is a public cloud, really, where you can start slicing this up to multi-tenancy. It
Sure.
wasn't until you really had that, and that, boom, that, that set it on fire. There's a lot of parallels there to what we see.
Yeah.
The other thing I would tell you is, just like in nature, nature abhors a vacuum, and so it tries to fill niches, right?
Right.
So I think everyone recognized that you needed an orchestrator. Maybe they didn't call it an orchestrator. Maybe they called it a manager or a swarm, right? And so even when I first became aware of like Docker and Docker containers, and I will tell you, the first time, Michelle, was I saw Solomon Hike speak at a conference in Denver, DFRAG, or one of the two that was over in right outside of Boulder. But anyway, and I said, wow, this is great, right? And I saw how excited people were getting. But people even then realized you needed an orchestrator, you needed that manager.
Yeah.
And Docker made a bet, right? Back then they were like fostering this ecosystem and then
Absolutely.
picking their chosen.
They were king.
They would,
Yes.
oh, they were kings of the mountain.
Absolutely.
It's funny, I think DockerCon is actually today, you know that?
Today or tomorrow.
Interesting.
Virtual Docker.
Virtual. Yeah.
Interesting, they told me that they have like 10x the amount they ever had at a live DockerCon on the virtual one, but for another day. Anyway, they would pick a company and buy it. In this case, they bought the Swarm open source project, the people who were doing Swarm, and made it what became Docker Swarm. And if you would have asked people back then, what do you think the dominant
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
when we as a company, when we first came about, there was not just a single answer for orchestrators. And
No.
we started life like everybody else in this field, focused on container security, right? Because containers had dramatically upended security. They broke all your existing tools, and you needed something that could work at this more atomic level. And so we, like everybody else, zeroed in on the container, and we were orchestrator agnostic. And we began to watch this evolution of Kube, and it was more than 2 years ago that we made the call to go all in on Kube. And I can tell you, it was very frightening. Those were some very difficult exec discussions about, do we do this? Because we had customers on Swarm that we were going to have to walk away from. It's very hard in your early days as a startup to decide you're going to say no to some money you've already been handed. Like, that's frightening. But
it's the hardest thing for a startup to do, but
it's also
the smartest thing is know when to say no.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
It's often the difference to success, right? And
absolutely.
It just became clear. I mean, I don't know that it was clear. We made this bet. There was so much functionality. If we could assume that Kube was there, we could deliver a far more superior security experience. We could pull in a bunch of information from Kube that we couldn't know just by looking at the container, right? It's not that interesting to look at any individual container, but it's very interesting to look at a whole environment and say, is this running in prod or test? Is this open to the internet? Because I can look at network policies and figure that out. Is there a dodgy process that's been launched against this thing? Because now I can look at runtime execution. How's it configured overall? Where are secrets? Are there any secrets exposed? When you can see the Kube picture, you have all this rich context to understand and apply to security. And then similarly, if you say, Kube's got a bunch of capabilities, it's got admission control. Should something even launch? It's got network policy. How do I reduce the blast radius? A lot of your kind of first principles in security are available to you by tapping the power of Kube. And so we realized we don't have to recreate a bunch of functionality in our platform if we know Kube's there. So it was expedient for us. But the more important thing was the better security outcome. I know more, I can make better decisions, I can be more certain about my decisions, I can make those decisions automatically, and everything's in the infrastructure. There's
Right,
no
you can
like
make it
invisible hand.
system-wide.
Yeah, make it
Right.
system-wide, make it consistent, prem, cloud, your
Mm-hmm.
policies follow you, just like Kube. All of the, all of those attributes of Kube, of why that's your universal layer. Now you apply that to security, and that's a beautiful story. Beyond that, though, there's also this, you have to look at the people element. And if we think about this whole notion that in this world, we really need to build a bridge between security and DevOps. These teams need to not be so separate anymore, and they need to work together. When you leverage all the native capabilities in Kube, now your security layer is the same as your infrastructure layer. It's not this abstract control software sitting on top, like, working like some invisible hand, doing stuff that nobody understands. Everything's in Kube. Why is X not talking to Y? Let's look at the Kube policies. Why is my app broken? Let's look at the Kube policies. And if it's all in Kube, then everybody's working off that same source of truth, and troubleshooting's faster. You're introducing less operational risk. All of that gets a lot better.
So let me make another analogy to nature. I think when you're working at the container level for security, it's almost like quantum, right? At that atomic, subatomic level. And there's some weird rules
That apply in
the quantum sphere that
And
don't necessarily...
Yeah,
Any quantum, right.
and it can't be seen necessarily
Right.
from.
Well, yeah, it is subatomic. It's quantum,
Yes.
right? And you have, just chaos. But there's rules. Maybe we just don't know those rules yet. But then you have sort of the general relativity world of Einstein and modern physics and all of that. And there, up until you get down to the quantum, there's a very standard, the standard model, as they call it, right?
Right.
Where we know what the four forces are and how they interact. And it's the same sort of analogy here. Now, but what's interesting, and it's just as interesting in our discussion here, is just because at the Kube level, right, we have the standard model, and you're able to leverage that to really do security in this infrastructure the way it should be done, right? Leveraging the native infrastructure, not bolting on yesterday's cloud or your grandpa's, perimeter stuff
Right.
into this. At the same time, when you continue to go down to that quantum level,
you still need to
Yes,
secure
you do.
the container,
Yes.
right? But that's a relatively...
I say it's relatively simpler. There are people who will tell you, no, there's malware contained in containers now,
Yes.
and there's
No,
configuration,
and
payloads, all that.
To be clear, there are things that are appropriate to do at the Kube layer and things that are appropriate to do at the container level. You need container intimacy to do Kube security well.
Sort of
Because
the grand unified theory of container and Kube security.
Sorry.
I feel like we're smoking dope in college, Michelle. You mean on my thumbnail there's a whole universe?
Analogy just keeps working. Just keeps playing out. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You do need to still also be operating at the container level. It's just, where do you want the major smarts to be, and where, sort of like, where do you want to drop the hammer? You want to drop the hammer from that central point of orchestration, not from some little individual widget.
Yeah, no, you can't,
shim
because
thing down
there's
at the
too
container
many
level.
of those, right?
Exactly.
That's the problem with quantum.
And how do you undo it when it's time to undo it? Yep.
Down there. So, great job. We've laid the table, right? We've laid out the table. Now, Stack Rocks, how do you do there? How do you take care of all these things?
Yeah. So, again, we want to, be a good Kube citizen and live in that world, right? So we deploy as a Kube app, and we, there's certain things we fully understand are essential. Everybody understands this need to shift left and apply security a lot earlier. And it's just a question of the how. So if you have a corporate policy around what images should look like, for example, great, instantiate that in a way that applies universally And that delivers that feedback right to the developer in the pane of glass they're already living in, right?
Yeah.
So, the smarts might be in the StackRox policy engine, but the delivery of that is wherever that person is, right? So delivering into Jenkins, for example, or so that I can immediately see that something's non-compliant, or again, delivering like a network policy into Kube itself. All of that, the point is to facilitate all of those policy decisions in the infrastructure that your team is already using. And so what we do is deploy as a Kube app, help you shift left with things like vulnerability management and configuration management. You need to harden the environment. A lot of the work, and everybody understands this, a lot of the work in security in the cloud native world is well before there could be an attack at runtime. It's probably 80% of your work. And if it's always been the case that, 95% of breaches are human error, there's no reason to think it's going to be different in containers and configuration, in containers and Kubernetes. And a lot of the heart of that is how did everything get configured? And you have sanity checks on all those configurations. So StackRox covers, build, deploy, runtime. We use the infrastructure already in place to do that enforcement, native admission controls, native network policies, instruments of enforcement directly in Kube. And, complement that wherever you're running. So prem, cloud, doesn't matter. We run wherever your infrastructure runs. We run as a set of containers and a daemon set on the node, and work with all the big cloud providers. I'd say probably 70% of the deployments where we're running are in the cloud, and a certain chunk on prem. Sometimes it's prem earlier on, and then they're going to move to scale at the cloud. But we run wherever the infrastructure is running, cover the full life cycle, and give you a much better security outcome because of being our Kube native.
I think when we see hybrid Kube deployments, there's a reason why, either someone's really hung up about running it on bare metal and the freedom that gives them to run it on-prem or whatever, or they run the majority of their stuff, whatever, up in the cloud, and there might be something that either for governmental regulatory compliance, whatever reasons, needs to be on-prem, and that's why I think that's kind of the migratory path as well. I think the important thing, though, Michelle, is when we look at this path of security, of Kube security, right, and kind of the journey that StackRox is on, what it's also really doing, though, is marrying that security to that dev experience at the Kube level, where, yes, a security person could play with your policy engines, right, and twist some dials and set the settings. But really that DevOps person who's managing the Kube
install,
they got that security info right there. The same way they have their ops info, right, in how the infrastructure is performing. The same way they're looking at deployments and pushing out containers and so forth. It's not, I got all my stuff here, and over here
and then
is
over
my
here,
security.
there's some, exactly.
Right? Now let me look at security, right? Security's right here with it integrated in everything else I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And I'm the man. I'm the man or the woman who's doing it. I don't need the security guy to come in and look and tell me what it is I'm seeing exactly.
Nor do you want to do it in that delayed after the fact kind of fashion. Like, talk about anti-DevOps, right? Like, now let's go figure out if we built it right. It's sort of like how, we do one thing in dev test and now we're going to somehow do a totally different thing in prod. You don't want that, right? You want parity between these environments. Same thing with security. So you want that guidance early. You want those guardrails in place in the world they're already working in, automatically all the time, and constantly getting tuned and improved. But, right there, so that it's not an after the fact, later, slow me down kind of process.
Well, because the problem is you can't get security people in time.
Right. And you'll never have enough of them.
Because there's not enough of them.
There's not enough of them.
That's it. That's the issue.
So the other thing is to get those smarts, like what does good look like? What does safe look like?
built in.
build some code that tells you that rather than having to ask a human. Like, you'll never
agree.
keep up if you try to do
No.
it.
No, it's like timing the market, man.
Exactly. It's one of those magic moments. People see some of the policies in the StackRox platform, and they're like, oh my gosh, so you're just automatically going to find every instance where, X, Y, and Z are not in place? Yeah, we are. And they're like, oh my God, I could never try to keep up, right? I could never try to replicate that.
It's true, and that's where it is.
Yeah.
I got bad news. We blew past that 20-minute timeline here. But hey, this was a great conversation. I kind of liked it. We'll have you back on in a few weeks because I know there's another topic we want to potentially hit on as well. So maybe next week or the week after we'll have you back on and we'll continue the conversation.
That sounds great, Alan. Appreciate it very much. You too.
All righty. Take care. My friend Michelle McLean from StackRox here on TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
All right, our next interview is with Susan St. Clair of Checkmarks, and it's regarding a survey they recently did. I found this survey really interesting because normally when we see surveys around AppSec and attitudes around AppSec, we're either surveying security people and what do they think, or dev and DevOps people about what do they think about application security and how it affects them. This survey is a little different. This survey looks at consumers. And what do consumers think about AppSec? Do they really care? How much do they care? What do they think it is? And the folks at Checkmarks, I think, did a really nice job on this one. And Susan will tell us more about it. She was a delight to speak to. So here's my interview with Susan St. Clair from Checkmarks.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, back here for our next interview. I'm happy to be joined by Susan St. Clair, who is with Checkmarks and is coming to us today from Canada. We don't get the chance to have a lot of folks from Canada on the show, so always welcome. Hey Susan, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks, Alan. I'm very excited to be here.
Great. So Susan, I mentioned you were from Checkmarks, but I didn't tell folks your role at Checkmarks. Why don't you fill them in?
Sure. Yeah. Currently, I am a evangelist subject matter expert for our dynamic interactive testing solution. But I've been in the field focusing specifically on application security for probably the last 5-6-ish years. We don't want to put too strong of a number on there, but I've definitely been around, I guess.
Yeah, no, look, you started at a very young age, and that explains it. And for I think most of our audience is probably familiar with Checkmarks, but they are one of the leaders in the application security space and really kind of help pioneer kind of the dynamic and static testing. And then there's a third kind that Checkmarks actually spun up. It's probably about 3 years ago now, 3 years. What's the third one? Dynamic, static, and...
open source.
Okay.
SCA.
Oh, that's right. The SCA, Software Composition Analysis.
That
right.
Was
it. Yeah. No, only because I speak with Matt a lot, Matt Rose, and actually he was on with me just a couple weeks ago, I think. But Anyway, so Checkmarx is a leader in that, and I think our audience is familiar enough. Susan, I wanted to talk to you about a recent survey that Checkmarx has done, and with some good findings. And why don't we what was the survey about, who answered it, and then we could jump into kind of what some of the interesting findings were.
Yeah, no, for sure. I thought it was a very, just me as an individual, I actually was very excited about the survey. I thought it was an interesting read. Basically, what we did is that we surveyed around, I think, 1,500-ish people in the U.S., adults, 18 to a higher age. And really what we wanted to understand was, what's your perception of, application security? It's not something, I think that a lot of people think about outside of the industry. Certainly if I talk to my in-laws, they would have no idea, for example. But, exactly. I'm still not quite sure they understand what I do. Right. So, but, we wanted to, we saw that with this situation that we're all experiencing here, and being staying at home, we're relying a lot more on applications and software just to get groceries or get food delivered. So we wanted to really understand, well, hey, have you thought about application security, and what are your thoughts on that? So we went out and we surveyed, and I think we got some really interesting results back from it.
I don't think so. I'm in security 20 years. I don't remember ever seeing a survey where we kind of asked the common man, what do you think about security? What do you think about application? This is interesting. So 1,500 adults around the U.S. Mm-hmm. What was some of the, what are the big headlines out of it for you?
Sure. So I think, as you would probably expect, again, just from your own life and what you see your friends and family doing, we see that a lot more people are using applications, a lot more people are using software, just in their day-to-day. Again, mm-hmm. The kids are on Zoom or Google Classroom. I tried Instacart for the first time to get groceries, all the food delivery. So it's become, I think it's accelerated the digital transformation that we in the industry have always been waiting for and kind of seen, but it's accelerated it. Like you said, now everybody's kind of jumped on board because they were forced to. So I think that was not necessarily surprising, but the numbers were high. Over 40% have increased their usage, and if we look at increased usage and people who are remaining the same, that's about 80%. If we look at the numbers on the survey, so really high numbers. And then of course, with that, with that usage now, then people start to think about, well, what does this mean for me? Again, with the security and, with all the news coverage with Zoom and with some of this contact tracing. So I think it's really raised the bar from the common man to think about applications, how they're integral to our lives, and what does that mean?
It really does. Listening to you talk, and I never used Instacart either before all of this, but they're now like my best friend. I have them across every market we go to. My son went back up to college, and he's using Instacart, my Instacart, I should mention.
To get his groceries. Yeah, well, that's college kids, to get his groceries delivered.
But I wonder how many of the consumers, so they look at all of these things. Zoom is a perfect example too, by the way, right? I think people got introduced by Zoom, and I have to tell you, until you've tried to teach 70-somethings how to use Zoom, you haven't lived. But, but teaching them how to use Zoom, and then all of a sudden we started hearing about the Zoom bombings and all of these things, and people began to think, oh my goodness, this is, and this is something I've been telling my in-laws and my wife's family forever. This is why we can't have nice things, because there are bad people in the world who screw up our internet, and why you need to be careful of what you click and all of that. And now people are seeing that, right? Zoom bombings and hackers and identity theft and credit card. And we've had a pandemic of COVID-related cyber threats along with the pandemic of the actual virus.
Absolutely.
But I don't know, do they make that connection to, geez, do they just, in other words, do they think it's just, that's the way it is? Or do they say, there's this thing called AppSec, application security, that can help us, right? And if so, how, what? Is there something I could do as a consumer to make my AppSec better? Or is that kind of in the hands of the developers and the people who own the apps, and there's nothing I could do about it? So that's question. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just like anything else in life. If I am, if my doctor says to me that, hey, you need to maybe live a bit more healthy, you need to eat better, you need to get out, work out more, suddenly I'm more interested in healthier recipes, and I'm more interested in how many minutes do I have to walk a day, or so I think, like, from a consumer point of view, are they really interested in AppSec? Not necessarily, but now they see those articles, they're like, oh, well, maybe I should be very careful about where I download my apps from, make sure it's a good application store, or maybe I shouldn't click on this link right from my text message. So I think that they start to pay more attention to some of the best practices that are out there. I think it also then impacts developers, right? So they know that consumers are looking for better security applications. So there becomes more of a priority, I think, in adding application security to the build and the release process with static code analysis, like that Checkmarx does, or pen testing. I think it also is on companies to be very clear about, if you're collecting data, where does it go? Who has access to it? Or, if I'm using a third-party platform and their APIs to track my data, are they secure? Do I need to be worried about them? And to be very clear about this. And also, how can I get my data back? So I think it's a multi-layered approach in terms of awareness, and as well as adding urgency from the consumer all the way up to the organizations that are developing applications that people use.
Agreed. I'll tell you something else. In a more consumer-orientated world, marketing world, business world, consumers vote with their feet in their pocketbook, right? If they deem something not trustworthy or, threatening, they don't buy it, and they walk somewhere else. What we've seen here, and look, there are alternatives to Zoom, for instance, right? But yet, in spite of the, thousands of reports that we saw when this whole COVID thing first started about, potential Zoom bombing and security issues, they've stuck with it. They stuck with it because just the same thing we've always seen in security, Susan. They'll sacrifice security for ease of use, right? And this is just a fundamental flaw we have in human nature, I think, where we're willing to put up with risk for ease of use, or because no one, change is hard, or no one wants to change and go through that. And it's a damn shame is what it is, right? When you think about it. And because ultimately, what's going to make these app developers, these companies putting the apps out, do better scanning with check marks, fix these vulnerabilities? Well, when their customers start saying, wait a second, mister, I don't want to use your app if it has these potential security holes. I don't want my data. And I don't know if and that might be a good follow-on study here, survey to do with these 1,500 people. What would it take for them to kind of put the screws to the apps people and say, I'm going to use a different app? If
Right.
there's, how much security am I willing not to put up with?
I agree. I think it's always something that, with us in the industry, it's always very frustrating, right? Like, why do you put yourself at risk when you don't need to? But, looking back at the survey, I mean, a good majority, like over 50%, 60% are saying that this is something that's really important to them. And even within the Zoom example, oh gosh, the publicization in the media, right, about the security problems. And I know up here in Canada, certain schools won't use it because they're concerned about privacy. But Zoom itself, I have to give them credit. We're
Absolutely.
using, they are like pumping out updates like constantly. So I think it has changed behavior at an organizational level, and maybe that will help, seeing that kind of response will help change consumer or users levels as well.
I'm reminded, I did a podcast that has to be now 10 years ago, maybe more. And I had on the podcast, it was my friend Rich Mogul, who I think had just left Gartner at the time, started Securosis. And I had the CEO of MongoDB at that time and the CEO of Couchbase at that time. So these are the two leading, you know them, Susan, but the two leading NoSQL database vendors. And, the kind of running joke back then was that NoSQL stood for no security.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
So we did this podcast, and I asked these two database CEOs, does NoSQL mean no security? How come you guys don't have more security features built into your products?
Mm-hmm.
And they both said, and they agreed with each other, that they will build in more security when their customers demand more security. But right now, their customers were demanding other things that were a higher priority. And so now, shortly thereafter, there was a big MongoDB bug, vulnerability, and that got that fixed real quick. But I think that is the reality of it, is until these apps customers sort of not just give lip service to security being a top priority, but really, as I said earlier, vote with their pocketbook or vote with their wallet, right? Or vote with their feet. They don't take them seriously.
No, and I agree with you. And I do, again, that's what we've historically seen. We've prioritized other things within application development over security. I think what might be different this time is it's becoming such an integral part of our lives. So just like any other change, if you look at various industries, you reach a certain critical mass and people are like, what, this is part of my day-to-day. I'm not putting up with this. You will fix it. Right. So I'm hopeful, I think that, I know, fingers crossed, I know that we're reaching that point, right? That, I can talk to my father-in-law and I'd be like, your open Wi-Fi with all of your devices on, like just open, maybe not a good idea. I know.
My wife's family still say, what does he do for a living? But anyway, Susan, we're about out of time. I want to thank you for coming on and sharing with us. You know what we didn't tell people? Where can they get more information about this survey?
Oh, absolutely. Certainly, if you're, on the various social media, Twitter, you can follow us. We have a link to it. Or you can actually just go to checkmarks.com blogs, and it's front and center right there.
And Checkmarks has an X at the end, not a KS.
Yes, with an X. Thank you very much.
Not my first time interviewing people from Checkmarks. No problem. Hey,
Susan St. Clair, Checkmarks, thanks so much for being our guest on TechStrong TV.
Thank you so much for having me.
Survey. My pleasure. We'll hopefully see you again. Say hello to all our friends at Checkmarks for us.
Will.
All righty. This is Alan Schimmel on TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest.
With the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to protect yourself and others from spreading the virus. Prevention and personal safety is key. Here are the top ways you can protect yourself and others. Wash your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. avoid touching your face. Practice social distancing and avoid high-risk potential people. If you are showing symptoms, stay at home. If you must go out, wear a face mask. Always cover coughs and sneezes with a tissue or use the inside of your elbow. Clean and sanitize frequently touched surfaces daily. Together, we can prevent this pandemic.
All right. Our next segment on today's show is something old out of the archives. And we went back to DevOps World, Jenkins World, San Francisco, 2019, for an interview I did with Forrester DevOps analyst Charlie Betts. Charlie's a frequent contributor at our conferences and so forth, and he's a heck of a nice guy. He comes from the kind of ITSM world, transitioned to DevOps a couple of years ago, and covers the DevOps, one of the folks covering the DevOps beat over at Forrester. This is an interview with Charlie, as I mentioned, at DevOps World in the Moscone Center. And it's interesting to see. It's about a year ago now, a little less. Let's see how Charlie's views have held up over the year. So here's Charlie Betts from DevOps World, San Francisco, 2019.
This is Digital Anarchist at DevOps World, Jenkins World, San Francisco, 2019.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel of DevOps.com. We're on Digital Anarchist Live here in San Francisco at the DevOps World Jenkins World conference at the Moscone Center. And I'm really happy to be joined by Charlie Betts of Forrester, and also Charlie Betts, the author from the Open Group. Mm-hmm. Same person.
Yes, exactly.
Charlie, welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Good to see you, Alan.
Good to see you as always. So Charlie, we had an extensive conversation off camera here as we ran into some technical difficulties. We apologize. But, you know, we had a chance to catch up about a recent initiative from the Open Group.
Yes.
That really was kind of based on a book that you wrote.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of industry input and a lot of editing. And really it's been converted to sort of a living, breathing open source blueprint, if you will.
Yes, absolutely.
Tell our audience about it.
Sure. So here's the thing. So I'm here also today as adjunct faculty at the University of St. Thomas, which
Fantastic.
is, you know, I'm very proud of this role. It's a don't quit your day job role.
I get it.
It's a service. I do this as a service. I teach a very broad and diverse variety of students in my classes called IT delivery.
Okay.
And it's basically, it lays out DevOps, it lays out Agile, it lays out how these are mixing it up with older forms of IT management, you know, IT service management, project management, and how the whole thing has combined together into the environment that people will find themselves in when they graduate with a master's degree from the University of St. Thomas.
Fantastic.
Right. And so as I was looking at all the textbooks, and even as adjunct faculty, I can requisition. I get textbooks for free, right? Mm-hmm. And so I had a pile of them this big on my desk. And it's funny, you get these textbooks and you read them and like, oh, Agile might be a thing someday.
Right.
You know, and this is a textbook, copyright 2017. You know, but they're even though they have a current copyright,
those who do and those who don't, right?
Unfortunately,
we know.
Yeah, right. It's all too true sometimes, although I'm trying to be one of the exceptions
I get it.
here.
Well, but you want to know the truth. That's not to digress too much, but that's one of the beautiful things about having adjunct professors at a university.
Yes.
Is rather than just getting these academians, and nothing against academians, they're smart people. I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
Even, you know, I'm a coastal elite. I'm not going to badmouth academians.
Right.
But having, you know, they live in that ivory tower.
They do.
Where Agile might be a thing someday, and this DevOps thing's a little new yet.
Yeah.
But, you know, having adjunct professors gives you a chance to really talk to practitioners, people who are living and breathing, have dirt under their nails.
Yeah.
You know, I went to law school, and I went to New York Law School in downtown Manhattan. And one of the reasons I went there and the reason I loved it is rather than having all full-time law professors, and we did have some.
Yeah.
We also had a ton of adjunct who were really practicing attorneys in the field. Right. So for entertainment law, I had like an amazing entertainment lawyer.
Yeah.
For trial
absolutely.
advocacy, we had Harry Lipsig, the dean of of Lipsig and Sullivan. We had amazing teachers, and that for any young people out there, or not so young people who are in school, going to a school and making sure they have adjunct professors. So you get a Charlie Betts who's out here at Forrester living the life rather than some guy who's writing about it.
Yeah.
It's a big difference. It's a huge advantage.
And I do a lot. Of course, I do a lot of writing at Forrester. But before that, I was a practitioner.
Right.
You know, I was at Wells Fargo. I was at Target. I was at Best Buy. So you know, I've lived that life. But here's where, you know, I think bodies of knowledge. Now, oftentimes when I say we did a body of knowledge, people will say, "Oh, geez, another certification. Who needs this stuff? It sounds so old school." Mm-hmm. Am I right?
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, I mean, I know
no, we don't need no stinking certs.
Yeah, we don't need
There's
no
definitely
certs.
a movement about that out there.
You know, absolutely. And I'm going to take the other side of it. Now, I realize there's been abuses in the certification ecosystem, and it doesn't help to, you know, have somebody go to a 2-day course and then claim that they know everything about Scrum and Agile. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem. It's a problem not only in IT, it's a problem even in other fields.
No doubt.
You know, so, but we still have certification because we are trying to transmit knowledge, and I want to offer to you a story. So, I was at Target for a couple years. And then much later, about 2015, I was at St. Thomas and I noticed a headline in the paper. It says, Target laid off hundreds of people. And there was a press release. Now, big companies lay people off all the time, right? But this one was notable because it said, we are letting these people go because of our transition to an agile operating model. And if specifically impacted were business analysts and people from the project management office. Project management office was all but shut down. And here's where it gets interesting. As part of their severance package, these people got some credits with the University of St. Thomas. They showed up in my class asking, Charlie, what just happened to us? And I knew some of them. And these are people...
They brought it home for you.
You know, oh my God. I mean, these are people I had worked with. These are people in their mid-40s. They're not ready to retire yet. They've got runway. And yet they were saying they let hundreds of us go from the PMO and the business relationship management capability, and there are all these DevOps positions open. Can you tell me what just happened? I mean,
and what the heck is this DevOps anyway? Yeah, no, I had a discussion at breakfast around this. But anyway, so what did you tell him, Charlie?
Well, I mean, I did the best I could, but that was where I kind of developed a bit of a fire in my belly that, yeah, sure, it's great if you're one of the leading thinkers or, you know, you're working at a company that's giving you the opportunity to do DevOps and Agile, and you've got friends and, you know, relations, whoever, helping you every day work through it, but not everybody has that. And at this point, this is the new normal. And folks, as Gene Kim likes to say, we've got 8 million developers and 8 million operations staff, and it's not just going to bleed into them through osmosis. This is why we need some formalized bodies of knowledge. We need to declare what we think as a community is important. It's about transmission, and at the end of the day, I'm not getting any younger. You know, I got the gray hair coming in. And I was
have no hair coming in.
Reminded by that Indigo Girls song from their very first album, you know, where it says, time makes history of us. And so you start to think about, well, what am I leaving behind here? How can I help the next generation?
Yeah.
And so this is really the motivation. So I wrote a textbook. And I wrote it all on GitHub. It was an open source project. We had about 20 people contributing to it. I curated in a lot of the best information I could find. Gene Kim, Don Reinertson, the leading thinkers in Lean and Agile, as well as bringing in, with respect and yet a critical stance, the best of what I saw from IT service management, project management, process management, governance, architecture, looking at these older traditions very critically, but also saying, look, there's something there. You don't just throw these things out. They have to adapt. But at the end of the day, as long as we're dealing with other people's money, Alan, there are going to be auditors.
Absolutely.
You know?
Well, and so one of the things I learned in my career in cybersecurity is if the only reason you're doing something is for compliance or audit sake,
Right.
you're doing it for the wrong reason.
Correct. I take your
Because
point.
those audits and compliance regs are there for a reason in that they represent at least a least common denominator level of what we should
Yeah.
best practices to be doing. But I think there's a bigger issue that you touched on here, and it goes back to this Target story you just told, and it goes back to a lesson that really got brought home to me many times in my career in tech. And and it's part of this whole shiny trinket syndrome that we live in, where
Yes.
the new thing is the hot thing, and just because it's the new hot thing, everything that came before it is now dog do, right?
Yeah.
And so, hey, we got DevOps. We don't need no stinking waterfall, right? We've got Agile. We don't need no waterfall. We have got AI ops. We're getting rid of APM. It's always out with the old, in with the new.
Right.
But life doesn't work that
Life
way.
doesn't work
IT
that way.
doesn't certainly work that way.
No.
Right? And so I'd like to think that we live more on a continuum,
Yes.
right? Where, and the other thing is, and again, this isn't I don't think it's just an American issue. I think it's a worldwide issue where it's not black and white. Something doesn't go from being good to being all bad or being useful today and obsolete an hour and a half later.
Yep. No.
That's nonsense,
No.
right? What we need to do as an industry, and I'm not familiar with your document, and I'm getting on my soapbox here, I apologize.
Yeah.
But what we need to do as an industry is say, okay, given this new reality we're living in, given these trends that we're seeing, like an Agile, like a DevOps, Lean, and all of this, how can we take what's best about service management?
Yeah.
How can we take what's best around IDLE
Yeah.
that we've invested a couple $1 billion into? How can we take what's best about what we've been doing well? We haven't done everything screwed up. There's been some things we've done well.
Yeah.
How can we take what's best and graft these new things onto them
Yeah. Yeah.
and be better? And that's the issue.
Yeah.
In my, that's what I see, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe because I'm sitting here now and I'm not, I'm not a vendor anymore. I'm not working for an organization. I get to be clearly an observer. But that's what I see, Charlie.
Well, so what we did, and I thought a lot about this, was let's look at bodies of knowledge and standards and frameworks. They're products. And so we have to take a product management approach. What's the job to be done? And who are the stakeholders, and how do we provide value to the stakeholders? Now, we know, for example, that bodies of knowledge, I firmly believe that they should be held in the public trust. That they are a public trust, and that therefore they should be under some form of open governance. I also believe that the open source community has paved the way for bodies of knowledge that can be continually updated to reflect
That are living and breathing.
curated best practices. And it's a combination of open source tools and techniques along with Wikipedia, what Wikipedia pioneered as far as evidence of notability. You don't get into Wikipedia unless it's notable, where you're not going to get into the DP-BOK unless you're notable.
Right.
But then it'll be a pull request because there's some of the mechanics around that are superior to wikis. And then bottom line is that you have to have it very firmly grounded in Lean and Agile. They provide a useful foundation, but then you can reinterpret things like governance and architecture in this new light. And it's not a throwing out of what came before, but it is a reinterpretation, I think, in many ways, moving away from Taylorism and the idea that process for the sake of process will save you.
Because we do. So here's a perfect example.
Yeah.
With hindsight, we saw that, we were doing process for the sake of process in some of these places, and that wasn't good.
No.
Here's my prediction. With hindsight, 5 years from now, you and I could be sitting here, and let's hope we both are doing well. But 5 years from now, we'll look back and say, something we were doing with DevOps or around microservices, we were doing to be orthodox or whatever, right? Where in hindsight, maybe it wasn't the right thing to do. That doesn't mean all DevOps is bad or all Agile is bad.
Yeah.
It just means that this is what, things change. We get better perspectives. as we learn and evolve.
Yep, we certainly do.
And that makes it why we should do, why these kind of open source kind of best practices and frameworks. Another thing I wanted to mention is, I'm one of the co-founders of DevOps Institute.
Yes.
And when we started putting together the curriculum that we were giving to everyone, for our training partners, we recognized that trying to say that something as new as DevOps, this is going back 3-4 years, had a best practices at that point was ludicrous.
Oh yeah, this is emerging practice.
These were emerging
practice,
and that's exactly the word we use. Emerging practices
Yeah.
that continue to be emerged and refined and everything else.
Yeah.
And that right there is the nutshell, right? That's the nitty gritty of it. So where can people get more information about this?
Open Group, the DPBOK went live 3 weeks ago.
And just for our audience, what is DPBOK?
Digital Practitioner Body of Knowledge.
Okay.
The Open Group, and there is a need to register, but you can access it for free once you register. So this is what I like the Open Group, because they do allow people to see the entire body of work
hence it's open.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me get off Open Group to Forrester. Sure. What's happening with Forrester and DevOps and all this stuff going on here?
Well, I continue to cover both enterprise service management as well as serving as the global DevOps lead for I&O. We're seeing market consolidation. Definitely, it's obvious with for example, CloudBees acquiring Electric Cloud. So that was a prediction we made last year. I guess I can turn to some of the predictions we made. Another one of the predictions we made is that there was going to be increasing security attention to DevOps tool chains, and there were a couple of cases that we will be bringing forward now where there were blockchain exploits that centered on poorly governed continuous delivery tool chains. So one of the predictions we made is we're going to start seeing enterprises really tightening down the controls around those. I mean, boy, if you rootkit a continuous delivery infrastructure, you have the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah, you do.
You can inject any arbitrary rootkit into anything else flowing through there.
No doubt about that. Yeah.
We're going to be careful about that. But I think that the broader question is going to be in the intersection of companies like ServiceNow with the DevOps world. BMC and ServiceNow have yet to place some bets here, and I think they're going to be placing more bets here. I mean, they placed some bets. I shouldn't say they haven't placed any.
No, they have. BMC certainly did
definitely,
some and they've tried.
But I think that, so let me wind that back a little bit. They've placed some bets, but I think that the bigger bets are yet to come.
Well, I think it's also a question, like you say, of consolidation and maturation.
Yes, exactly.
And this is the way of the IT world. We've seen it before, we'll see it again.
Absolutely.
Anyway, hey, we're way over time, actually, but it happens.
Yeah.
Charlie, congratulations
and
great work
Thank you.
on the Open Group stuff. Continued success with Forrester. Come back and join us.
I will.
And keep up the great work educating people at St. Thomas.
Yep.
Charlie Betts, Forrester, the Open Group, and adjunct professor at St. Thomas University. This is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com. We're live on Digital Anarchist at digitalanarchist.live. Thanks for joining us.
I got the burgers. I went to Bun Barn, Beef Patty Palace, Tomato Town.
Oh, thanks for getting all this, honey.
Yeah, no problem. Getting all of it just took about 2 hours.
I just wish there was an easier way to get all your burger fixings from one place, you know?
Yeah.
Dad, you didn't go to Mayo King?
You know our car doesn't fit in their drive-thru. I went to Mustard Chef.
I hate this burger.
He also went to ketchup.
When you're building something using components that don't work together easily, things could get ugly, fast. You wouldn't live like this, so don't make your DevOps team live like this.
This lack of burger cohesion is hard on all of us, Cheryl.
GitLab is the only single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle.
Hey, everyone. All right, Alan Schimmel back here in TechStrong Studios, and it's that time of the day now where we're going to do news headlines. These are, as I always say, just a couple headlines from a couple of the articles on Security Boulevard, Container Journal, DevOps.com. They're not meant to be exhaustive. We really encourage you to go check the sites out if you're interested. There's so much good good content going up every day. But let's do a quick scan of some headlines. On Security Boulevard, a couple of articles I want to bring to your attention. One is that companies are relaxing security protocols during remote work. And, there's this constant balance of risk management, right? Of we got to get stuff done. People are remote, and so we can't do what we did when they were here. But how much can we allow without the risk outweighing the reward? And this is a good article that discusses those points. I have another article up on the Boulevard. Is your company ready for SOAR? And SOAR is something that has been getting a lot of play lately within the security space. And good article, especially if you don't really know a lot about SOAR. It's a good one to catch up on. Next up, we have Container Journal. And over at Container Journal, we have container orchestration, avoiding errors and misconfigurations. Look, anyone who's worked with Kubernetes and Docker and all these things, it's not, no one said it was easy. No one promised you a rose garden. But this is a good little article to avoid paying some idiot tax on some common mistakes. Also on Container Journal, our friends at Rancher Labs, and I think we'll have them on later this week. On here on TechStrong TV. Our friends at Rancher Labs make Longhorn available, their latest release. And then over on DevOps.com, we have how embedded real-time engagement makes the internet more inclusive. Anything to make what we do more inclusive, I guess, is a good thing. Also, we have Atlassian updated their DevOps portfolio. Chef makes DevSecOps push, right? Chef is leaning hard into DevSecOps. BMS sets their strategy, and CloudBolt acquires Sov Labs. Wasn't aware of that one. I'll have to check that out. Those are the headlines making news today on DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, and Container Journal. Please go check out the articles as well as everything else on there. And while you're at it, maybe register for TechStrong Con. It's this Thursday, 12 hours strong. You don't want to miss it. All right. Now I think we're going to head things over to John Willis because it's Tuesday. John has a great guest, great conversation. So we'll let him take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, this is John Willis. I'm going to do another interview with friends, people I really respect. I'm just having a lot of fun learning stuff and getting to talk to people, especially in this COVID time. I've got a great guest this time. Steve, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, hi, John. Yeah, COVID time. Introducing myself was always hard for me because I'm one of those people that's intentionally had a lot of careers in my life. I started in our industry, the one we're talking about today, as a hardware guy in the early 80s and moved from there into mini computer system administration and then later into mainframe programming and then into automated administration of mainframes and later into porting Unix to the mainframe family. And that's what kind of got me into the industry that we're talking about here today. For me, it was the early 90s. I was writing tooling at the same time. I, for instance, ran across Mark Burgess's CF engine around that time. And I was out of the industry for a while. Chris Bychert dredged me up about a year ago for a talk that I think we're going to be talking about some today. I talked about it at the DevOps or Config Management Conference in Ghent last year.
So what was interesting is, I got into this infrastructure as code or configuration management. I had been doing it for many years. And, I typically call this second generation because I did Tivoli stuff all through the 90s, which I would have considered that form of configuration management like a first generation. But that's another topic. And when I got to Chef, when I was working with Adam Jacob and early on at Chef, I remember Adam pulling out this paper. And it was a paper written by you, the Why Order Matters touring experience. And you can give me the full name. And it was interesting because one of the things that we were doing at the time with Chef was the DSL was basically Ruby with Ruby class primitives, right? So, but most of what you wrote was a very imperative model of you were writing Ruby code to solve the problem, and it was order specific. And at the time, Puppet was declarative with the Puppet language, and it also used some, directed graph and stuff like that. And what we were finding is that paper was very helpful for me to understand, because even though I was doing a lot of technical stuff, I was really driving. I hired the first sales rep there, and we were trying to just drive the wedge of competitive opportunities of Chef versus Puppet at the time. And what we found was at scale, order did matter, and that paper made a lot of sense to me. And then, I put that one to bed. So I'm like, okay, this Steve guy, where is he? I don't know. Great paper. And then, by the time I get to 2014, I sell a company to Docker, and I go, I need to go read that paper again. This time I really dissected the paper. First time I was like, I just needed to know enough to sell the why order matters example, and it really was convergence, right? The whole point was convergence. But now when we got to, and it was interesting enough, which was you had three patterns, right? You had, what was the first one? It was
well, you start with divergence.
Divergence, right? Divergence, convergence, and congruence, right? So, but what was interesting to me is for the first time, and actually there was a little bit of Docker versus Chef at that point, right? That didn't last too long, but so I was like, wait a minute, sorry, Adam, I'm going to use your own gun because this whole section we talked about convergence, the Steve guy, is basically what Docker is. It's immutable images from the developer on. Anyway, that went along for many years. I got to know Mark really well, and every once in a while we talk about you, but it's like, where is this guy? Where'd he go? And then, I think it was Mark's workshop this year where we actually finally, you had knew me, I knew you, and you were like, hey, I finally got to meet you, John. And then the next thing you know, we got on a whole bunch of really cool calls. So, I think that's really cool. But I guess the thing I wanted to start with, and I know I'm spending a lot more time speaking when I'm interviewing, but Chris Byatt, you talked to Chris Byatt, right? So they've been running the configuration management camp as far as FOSDEM. And for many years, I've never had a chance to go until this year. But for many years, I've been watching what they were doing. But the last couple of years have been interesting because 2 years ago, Chris is, I think, really creative here and there. He was really driving the history. 2 years ago, he invited Mark Burgess, Luke Knies, and Adam Jacob, like CF Engine, Puppet, and Chef founders. And that was great, right? So to see them in 2019, the history. And then last year, out of the blue, he like you said, pulled you out of wherever you were hiding. And we've talked about that, but we don't have to go too far into that. And then your presentation is 100 years of infrastructure. And then this year he invited me. He said, you've always been talking about all these people work, right? You're the historian of the historians. And I did I got 99 problems, and a bash DSL isn't one of them. So it was interesting listening to your talk of sort of the history and that arc and the things I didn't know about some of the history I thought I knew. But how'd you wind up, did Chris pull you out? And it looked like you came out of your cicada hiding.
Honestly, John, I think he probably would have preferred you, and I was a second choice that year.
I don't know about that, but no, but it was
seriously,
a fantastic presentation.
I'm really glad that he was able to finally get you over to Ghent this past year, because I do think you are doing a very, very important thing. Not to try to butter up the host here too much, but pulling all of these folks together, the kind of work that Chris is doing, the kind of work that you're doing, pulling together all these different threads, most of which originated in the early 90s, I think it's really important, not only just for, just archival preservation of history, but also understanding how we got to where we are today, and understanding, even more importantly, where we need to go next and how we can get there. And some of the biggest hurdles between here and where we need to get to next have to do with understanding some of the, I'm going to go so far as to say, disagreements or even misunderstandings that currently exist in our industry. During this conversation, I'm going to just use Patrick's word DevOps just to kind of put a label on it, even though I'm not even sure Patrick himself is completely comfortable with how we're using that word. But the labels and models and so on, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later here, these things matter because they help people hook into their brain where an idea sits, right?
Yeah. No.
And I think that what the good work that folks like Chris and you are doing is helping to pull these models together, hang them up in the air next to each other so we can compare them side by side and understand better what actually happened and how we got to where we are. I'm starting to repeat myself.
Yeah, no, I think so. It's one of my goals for this is to, because I think we're going to get into that part of the arc a little bit later. But I did want to mention that, my narrative for the history of configuration management, like starting, say, with, infrastructure as code, if we will, is been very simplistic, and it's been missing some pieces until I got to meet you, which is, Mark created CF Engine, which really created these new notions of convergence and desired state and really computer science principles into how to do this. And then, my narrative has always been Luke was a frustrated CF Engine user, went ahead and created his own version of the same principles. Adam was a frustrated Puppet user, used the same principles and wrote his own. What I didn't know is the depth of your contribution and how, what you had been doing. And again, I want to talk about that a little later in the arc, but the ISConf work and the influence it had on, or the parallel influence you had with Mark at the time. And Mark has always been a big fan of yours every time I've talked to him. And then how it influences Luke decisions, which clearly influenced Adam's decisions. So I want to flesh that out. But the thing I want to talk about is your presentation. And I think we can cover all this in that presentation you did at Configuration Manager Camp, the 100 years of infrastructure, which is actually awesome and hilarious. You're very, very witty, funny. But one of the things you talked about in there is you said organizational art. And I always there's trigger phrases that I think help people. I mean, DevOps is a trigger phrase, right? It sets something where we can, okay, I like that, let's build around it. And, there's the art of business value, there's a lot of these art of, and I think those are always good topics. And I had never heard the phrase organizational art. And the way you express that, which is there is not one tool to solve, the thing you learned of watching, being involved in the early days, watching this thing from afar, coming back and tipping your head back in is there is no one tool to solve it all. And you called what we do an organizational art. I just thought that was really cool.
So for a lot of reasons we don't have time to go into today, if I have a life goal, it has more to do with the aerospace industry and space exploration, human frontiers, all that kind of stuff.
Good timing.
John is referring to the fact that we had the first crewed flight of a SpaceX Falcon, the Dragon capsule, yesterday. I'm pausing because my own life has wound back and forth in and out of the timeline that led up to yesterday's flight too, and I get goosebumps when I think about it. It's just so cool. The computer industry for me was a thing that was a means to aerospace. When I was in the Air Force in the mid to late 80s, it occurred to me, I got myself stationed at Langley Air Force Base because NASA Langley was across the runways there. And my main goal was to get into aerospace research and development. And it occurred to me back then that we did not yet have the ability to simulate an entire vehicle in flight with the engines running at any reasonable speed. And in order to get to the hypersonic speeds that you need to get to for orbit, let alone escape velocity, we needed better simulation. We needed supercomputers. We needed better supercomputers. And we still do. All of these things are still true today. It's still a very, very rough field. We still are so far from being able to do a full simulation before we start cutting metal. That's a lot of the expense and hurdles in the aerospace industry. So that's actually what got me. That's one of the things that got me interested in this stuff in the first place. And one of the things that I realized, and this was part of what got me into the Air Force and got me taking that chosen career seriously, is when Challenger blew up, Space Shuttle Challenger. And I watched it happen. I lived in Florida at the time, and it hit me hard, just like a lot of people. And when it became clear that that was an organizational issue more than a technical issue, that got me thinking a lot and helped me coalesce a lot of the thoughts that I had about how we, in fact, are, even today still, this many decades later, still running our organizations using very, very old art. Our and at least in the developed world, most countries, it's baked into our laws, it's baked into our regulations. The board of directors, the C-suite, middle managers, and line workers today. And this gets back to part of an answer to your earlier question. Why did Chris have to even dig me up? Where did I go? Where have I been the last decade or two? My wife but we're running a business that supplies to national labs, the aerospace industry, a lot of companies that I can't mention because I don't have permission from them. But the problems of those industries and the problems of their organizations are something that's still near and dear to my heart. That's where I've been the last 10 or 20 years before Chris dragged me back and got me talking to folks like you. Mark and I have been in communication over the last several years, as he and I have each been kind of comparing notes. And I like to use the word reconciling what we thought. I think back in the 90s, we thought were two different viewpoints. I think you and I will be able to get to that either later today or in a future talk.
No, I think, I've listened, we've talked quite a bit, since we sort of got to actually meet each other virtually, never in person. But that's a lot of what, at the end of the day, sort of the chef, the puppet, the code, the whatever, the Python, the Go, it's all interesting, and even your, newer configuration, Terraforms and all that's all really interesting stuff. But what really gets me exciting is that mix between organizational behavior, how structures create misaligned behaviors, and how you mix that with the technologies is really what wakes me up in the morning. So like I said, I'm probably going to steal that organizational art concept, because I think there is still, in our industry, I don't know if I would say unfortunate, because it just is what it is. There is more art than pure science in what we do. And that's okay, right? Like, the humans, the human factor of, I think, I'm rambling now too, but, I think one of the things that people miss in the symbiotic relationship between humans and computers is really never going to go away. People write code to instruct a set of, bit and byte calculators to do things. That's just, no matter how abstract, no matter how deep you get into ML or deep learning, it's still at one point, I guess there are scenarios where computers start instructing other computers, but the point is, organizational art is a great way to describe what we do in large banks today, right? There's no ML and DL that solves the 100%, top 5 bank all problem system.
Well, so the funny thing to me is that even though I was having those realizations in the late 80s about how the aerospace industry is my example I like to use, even though I had that realization that we use very old organizational art to run highly technical, highly complex systems and organizations, it took me a long time in what is now called DevOps. It took me a long time back in the 90s to realize that because of the fact that every organization is different, that says things about the tooling that's appropriate for a given organization. I take some of the blame for this, we used to have a lot of debates and even outright arguments over which tool is best for doing automated systems administration. And so many of us, again, myself included, spent a lot of time claiming that the thing that we were working on was the one tool to rule them all. And it's only been in later years, later decades, as I've matured, that I've realized that, wait a second, because of the fact that every single organization is this complex thing that's unique. We use the word snowflake. We were already using it back in the 90s when talking about computers. Well, organizations are even more unique as a snowflake compared to the computers that they're running, right?
Yeah.
And because of the fact that every organization is unique, that means that the code that it's running, whether it's application or infrastructure or anything in between, the code it's running needs to match that organization, needs to work with that organization, and needs to evolve with that organization and support the evolution of that organization. And by definition, then what that means is that the tools can't necessarily be these universal things that span multiple organizations and can be packaged as venture-funded products as easily as we thought back then. And while you can, and I think this is actually the right way to attack it, while you can come up with the primitives of what an organization is and what a computer is and what human interaction is and what human readable documentation is. I like to think of documentation as human readable code.
That's right. Yep.
You can look at what the primitives of those things are and come up with tool sets that are good at managing those primitives, but the way those tools are used is going to be radically different depending on the individual organization. I think this is a long-winded way of me describing maybe a little bit of what I mean about when I say things like organizational art. This is all art because of the fact that it is at least complex, if not chaotic. What was the name of that quadrant?
Well, Cynefin, but yeah, so we have to be a little careful there when we start using those terms. But let's just say there's some mixture of complicated and complex domains involved. But I think the thing that I think is interesting, and then I do want to get off into a little more of the science of your paper and your talk, but is that's the point, right? The reason why I like organizational art is the fact that it has to be art is we have this conflict of balance between that organizations have to be unique because they're designed as unique. Their initial idea of who they were had some uniqueness to it over 10, 15, 100, hundreds of years. A particular bank has a particular brand that was invented for, you take now we're going crazy, but there's a Delta History Museum here in Atlanta, right? It's a fascinating museum right at the airport. And Delta started out as a crop dusting company, right? Like, so there's a DNA in Delta that exists, right? And that's that even, after, I don't know how many years now, maybe, early 20s or whatever, when they started and they literally had contracts to do crop dusting, they started taking on passengers. But the point is that DNA is snowflake-ish. And then, so you have to balance the organizational design that you want to get some, still a future word, congruence in your design, but you have to, there's something special about your organization. And then that same thing with tools. In order to be incredibly effective, you have to be able to be very malleable with the tool set that you can use that fits your art side of organizational design, your art side of tooling. But then on the other side is you have to have some structure of your design, because otherwise you're just, you're not scalable, and you have to have some structure in your tooling, or else again, you have to scale. So by definition, there's a balance which has to be an art. And that's what I do.
I think the art piece, the hard part that is, it's turtles all the way down, right? Wheels within wheels, however you want to look at it. We like to think about coming up with tools, coming up with methodologies that are relatively cookie cutter because they're easy to describe, right? And they're easy to teach, they're easy to train, they're easy to onboard people. And
that's the scale, right? Like you have to have some form to scale, but you also, so again, I do think that's why art is, but the thing I wanted to talk about, I think which really starts getting into the meat of your paper, of the reason why I was intrigued by you in the first place, is this whole idea of immutability or immutable, right? And I really sort of got into that in a heavy way on, when I got to Docker. I'm pretty sure I coined this phrase as immutable delivery. There was immutable infrastructure that was coined by probably Martin Fowler or maybe somebody at Netflix. But to me, that was like the operating system at the time its package is immutable, and then you have all the properties of delivery of that. To me, when Docker came along, I thought, like, wait a minute, we can have actually what I would call immutable delivery, in that the artifacts at the time the developer lets go of them can be immutable, binary immutable, all the way through the system. And basically, to a certain extent, it's the same bits and bytes that were running on your laptop or your development environment that are in production. And as I pointed out, and you pointed out, a reference to something I pointed out is, which Mark would say, like before you get started, nothing's immutable. You have electricity. Like, let's get over that. That's a fact. But the thing so you pointed that out, and thank you for sharing some of my slides. But the thing that you said I loved, which is, you talked about models, so all right, so immutable, right? And nothing's truly immutable, but in my words, it would be an approximation. The way you described it is, if we thought more around the lines of models, and models are abstractions or approximations, then we could have a better getting to a truer state. And for me, that was how I would describe like a chef and a puppet as being deterministic. Like, so models can be deterministic or non-deterministic. It sounds, I'm going crazy here, but so a deterministic model might be, I develop a whole bunch of chef or puppet code and say the world every 15 or 30 minutes shall look like this.
Right.
Right. And so there's this sort of, it's good, but in a large scale, it may not be good enough because it is a deterministic view that like, okay, like 30 minutes later, at least it's back to the world we know. And then Mark in CF Engine 3 created what I call a non-deterministic model, which was more of an approximation of like, I have no idea what the world really looks like. All I can do now is create abstractions or models that say, I want the world to look like that. Let's let probability and emergence do its natural theater. Is that where you were going, all that, or?
Yeah. So I mentioned this in the talk, in the config management talk last year, but one of those butterfly effect accidents of history, we came this close. If it wasn't for just the realities of politics in international banks in the early to mid 90s, we came this close to having CF Engine already running trading floors worldwide by the mid 90s. And I liked.
That's important. I make sure
I liked the model. I had Mark's code in my hand in, I'm going to say, sometime around May 1994. He had started it in 93. And Mark and I had never met yet. And this was in the days when you had to use FTP to even get code over the internet. Or does anyone remember primetime freeware? You'd buy a CD and they'd mail it to you. I don't think Mark's code was on there, but that was the kind of model in those days. And so I thought that okay, if we can't use what was then called freeware or even shareware, the terms were being so misunderstood and misused, especially in the financial industry. I should back up a little bit. The reason I even the reason I even wound up in the financial industry in the early 90s was because the aerospace industry was going through the post-Cold War drawdown. Soviet Union had come apart and so on. And I suddenly found myself seeking an industry to exercise my Unix skills. And that's how I wound up in Manhattan and the banks and the trading floors. My reasoning at the time was, well, okay, the financial industry uses near supercomputer and in some places actual supercomputer horsepower to do derivatives math. This was the early derivatives days. And so I might as well go there. At least I'm still exercising the same skill set on similar hardware and so on. I had no idea at the time it was going to turn into the what I called at the time infrastructure automation industry. And so anyway, getting back to Mark and CF Engine, I thought, okay, since I'm not likely to be able to get buy-in for using this freeware code in a bank, let me emulate it with a pile of makefiles and shell scripts. And I really liked your 99 problems talk at Ghent this year, because it was very much the mode that I was thinking in the early 90s, where, all right, I'll use a pile of makefiles and shell scripts to emulate what Mark would be doing if I could run his code. I didn't realize at the time two things, and these two things I think need to be said in order. I didn't realize at the time that I was using a completely different approach than what Mark was thinking. And even after I had met Mark at LISA conferences in subsequent years, it took me years better than half a decade to realize how Mark and I were thinking differently about this.
And this is pre-promise theory too, so to be clear.
This is pre-promise theory, yeah. And so Mark later comes up with promise theory, and the light bulb starts coming on for me around that same time, maybe shortly before he started putting a label on it. The light bulb started coming on for me that, hey, wow, Mark and I are actually coming at things from completely different angles, and that's where we start talking about convergence.
Why did you realize you were divergent in your approach back pre-promise theory? Because this helped me educate. Because I would have thought, all right, so you were going to use Makefiles to emulate what he was doing, but he was basically doing convergence and desired state, and again, another overloaded where mathematicians get mad when you use it, but idempotency and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So what was your view later in sort of when you look back? Where
the light bulb didn't dawn on me, and I think it didn't dawn on either me or Mark until, and I mentioned this in my Ghent talk from last year, so it's public knowledge now. I'm comfortable gracefully talking about it, but we had a small explosion in Mark's CF Engine workshop in, I'm going to say, it was 2001. It was right after September 11th. And I had joined that workshop in order to talk about, there was one feature that I thought was missing from CF Engine that would have let me swap it in the place of the Makefiles that we were using in earlier at the banks. And by this time I was at NASA Ames Research Center in the supercomputing division. And I wanted to be able to use CF Engine for a rollout there. And there was this one little feature. I wanted deterministic ordering because it's the way my brain had been working for the last several years at the banks. We had to do what I was not yet calling congruence. We had to make sure that when we built the machine, it was, now we have terminology we can refer to today. I wanted Docker-like behavior on bare hardware in the 90s. Right. And I wanted to be able to hit the reset button on a machine and get, within reason, the exact same machine every time. Because I felt that with, your typical trading floor is pumping billions of dollars of transactions a day through it. We called that mission critical. It may not have necessarily been life critical unless you count people having heart attacks on the trading floor, but it's mission critical stuff, right? And it was really important to have that, again, I'll say Docker-like behavior.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to sneak in there for a second, because I think for me now, I'm getting it, even though we've talked about this a couple of times now, is that if you think about what, and correct me if I'm not getting this right, but if you think about what Dockerfile is to an immutable image, what you're saying is at the time that, CF Engine was, you give it a set of instructions and then it becomes this way, is more dynamic and not really immutable, because the thing you did very well in the paper talked about all the points of things that could inject itself during that process to make it less immutable, if that's a phrase. And what you were saying is you had a model, and I understand this now, that you could make files and scripts and things that you did, you could be very much similar to the way Docker files are, to say, when they're done, this is an immutable artifact.
Yeah. So I thought about starting my Ghent talk last year exactly that way, doing this really geeky live demonstration of first putting a Docker file up there on the screen and saying, okay, this is the strict ordering thing. And if you write a Docker file wrong, you still don't get deterministic if you don't tightly specify version numbers and hashes.
You can do nonsense things in there, bad script.
Yeah, you can do nonsense things. You can still end up with irreproducible behavior in a Docker file, right? But if you do it right, you've got exactly the same image every time. And that's helped by the caching of the Docker engine and so on like that. So what I was thinking to do to start that talk was to say, now, look, here's what was going on in the mid-90s on global capital markets trading floors, and at least one international bank. We had these make files. Now, if you run make with the -in flag, minus little n, make will dump out for you what it is about to do when you run it for real. It prints for you the list of commands that it would run. So in other words, -n is the no-op, just like rsync -n, right? And it looks, if you were to take the output of that make command and stick a capital run in front of it, you've got something that starts looking an awful lot like a Docker file. And if you then preface that whole list of run commands with a hash of an image, that is your base for all those subsequent commands, you've got now that hash is what we called the baseline image that we were working from in the early 90s. We actually called it baseline. And we always had this pristine image. We didn't use the word gold to describe that image. We used baseline. Gold we used in a completely different way, which it took me years to realize that we were using gold server in a way that was different than a lot of other people were using. But yeah, so you've got a baseline image. That's the from line at the top of a Docker file. We did not hash them. We did have them on a trusted NFS share, etc. And
so all you were missing was AUFS, really, right? Because that was
we were missing AUFS for distribution. I wanted at that time AFS was still a Transarc product,
right?
Not open source. OpenAFS wasn't yet around. I wanted AFS to be able to serve this stuff from. And
you had it. You had freaking Docker back.
Yeah, we were faking it with Symlinks and NFS. Yeah. And we didn't even have rsync yet, right? rsync wasn't yet around. I don't remember what date rsync shows up, but what we had was SUP or SUP, depending on which part of the country you're from. The Carnegie Mellon's SUP is the name of the thing. I still today wish there was something. I'm sure somebody's going to email us saying, oh, wow, this other thing over here that exists right now, it's on GitHub. It does what SUP used to do. But what SUP used to do was like rsync, but with the triggers that let you automatically execute a command if a local file changes on disk. I've wrapped rsync many, many times with ugly bash or Python scripts to get that kind of behavior. I have experimented with one or two tools in recent years that do that kind of thing. And of course, all the names are escaping me right now, and we're going to get called on this, I'm sure. But SUP was SUP NFS and this Symlink farm that was maintained by other scripts. Did I say bash a while ago? This wasn't bash days yet. This was Corn Shell.
Yeah.
We were excited when we were able to start using Corn Shell instead of just Bourne Shell. I remember that too. But so anyway, from line is equivalent to what we called baseline. And then we had what would today be called the run commands in a Docker file that were implemented by a make file. And we didn't understand at the time that we were getting that kind of ordered behavior out of make. That's the thing that really blew my mind.
Yeah.
I didn't realize until the early 2000s. It never really occurred to me until I went back and looked at it. I didn't realize until the early 2000s how much benefit we were getting out of that ordered behavior. And so getting back to that 2001 CF Engine workshop, I show up at the workshop and it's my turn to stand up and give my 3-slide presentation that I had just put together a few minutes earlier in the same workshop while everyone else was presenting. I stand up to give my little presentation about why the ordered behavior was beneficial to us. And I can't even get through the slides. I'm realizing that the rest of the folks in the room, all very CF Engine convergent focused folks, they not only didn't agree with the reasoning that I was trying to describe, but we didn't share the same vocabulary.
Yeah.
We didn't share the same worldview. We didn't share. One thing that it took me a while to suss out is the fact that again, going back to organizations, if you're in an organization that is used to experiencing chaos, a university computer lab, a lot of academic environments have this in common, for instance. Any other industry that I'm not even going to try to list them all right now because my brain's pulling a complete blank. But here I was in the financial and earlier aerospace industry coming from this direction of I want my determinism, darn it, right? And I realized that we were coming from different worlds, me and some of the folks in that room. And Mark hung around and talked to, my wife was in the workshop with us. She also was a web developer and system administrator at that time. Mark and my wife and I sat around during lunch after the explosion trying to talk about what had just happened. And Mark is such a caring, earnest,
he's a beautiful
focused guy, yeah. And he was trying so hard to understand what the heck this crazy Steve guy was saying,
about, yeah.
And vice versa. And I think it's taking us
Wow.
the better part of decades to have that conversation now. That's the crazy thing, you know? And
let me ask you this. Had you written the Why Orders Matter paper yet at that time?
No, and it's that explosion in that workshop that day that actually triggered that paper. It was late.
Because I think I think you still would have got the pushback, because in a certain sense, the chef versus puppet argument was really that, but it was a different form of convergence. It still wasn't congruence. But maybe I think you still would have got the pushback. That we'll talk a little about the tribal nature and what the glass is half full, because we've done tremendous things as an industry, starting with you, Mark, all the prior art from IBM and all the other places that you eloquently talk about in your paper. So this is great. I mean, what we have today with our Terraforms and Plumies and Ansibles is great stuff. The glass is half empty because we still have these human tribal things where we sort of, like we can't see the forest behind the trees. But I mean, the clarity that I got out of that paper was that just one slide, which is you show, divergent, convergent and congruent. And, almost I would have God, I wish you would have had that slide there, maybe, probably wouldn't have helped, but maybe could have.
I had a version of it, if I recall correctly, but I'm not even sure I was using the word congruent yet that day.
Yeah.
But what happened was, putting credit where credit's due, I was, after having conversations with a few people in the hallway track during the rest of that conference, the workshop was at the beginning of the week. An old friend named Lance Brown, who was at the time at the National Institutes of Health, he and I were having dinner one night, catching up, and I mentioned that workshop to him, and he kind of just looked at me and said, well, Steve, why don't you just use Turing machines to illustrate the point you're trying to make? That's, it's
let's jump into that.
Computing today.
Thanks, John. Another great segment, man. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. John's been just interviewing and having some great conversations with people. Next up is our managing editor, Charlene O'Hanlon, and she has some equally great interviews for you. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, managing editor at Media Ops, and I'm here now with Scott Gordon, who is the chief marketing officer at Pulse Secure. Hey, Scott, how are you? Thanks for joining me today.
Good. Thanks for the invite.
So I know Pulse Secure just recently came out with a survey that measured folks' kind of attitudes or thoughts on working from home in wake of the COVID-19 crisis, and then kind of moving forward what organizations had in mind regarding work from home. So can you tell me just a little bit about a little bit of background about the survey, how you guys got started, who you talked to, things like that?
Terrific. Yeah. So we had seen a lot of, first of all, we experienced what everybody experienced in shifting our workforce. So we're about 650 employees with a global presence. Obviously, we're square in the secure access market. That's what we sell. So for us, we already had a degree of work from home flexibility. But like everybody else, we did a massive shift. And like everybody else, we experienced some interesting times and work environments. But what we had a lot of firsthand view of large corporations and even medium enterprises contact us to extend licenses, to learn more about our capabilities. And when we saw other reports coming out about work from home, it certainly had some good guidance, but there was nothing that we saw that was very, very specific to the security practitioner and organizations the IT organizations that were dealing with this. So we partnered with Cybersecurity Insiders, which is an independent online group that does research, among other things. And they surveyed over 400 IT security decision makers with a really good cross-section of industries and sizes to really get down to the nitty-gritty of what people were experiencing, what was their concerns, where do they feel things were heading in their investments. So a lot of the news were things that you would assume, but there was a good amount of information that really was practical and sometimes even surprising. So we were happy to share the results.
Great. So yeah, tell us some of those, the findings that did surprise you.
Folks in the security industry, especially that are doing secure access like us, we did experience a really big business surge, not surprising, collaboration tools as well. Mm-hmm. And so what we saw typically, this would be prior to January of 2020, anywhere from 20 to 25% was the typical coverage for companies for remote workers, at least for medium to large enterprise. They did not expect such a massive and quick surge, and so it went from less than 25% in a matter of 3 months to upwards between 75 and 99% work from home. So that's a massive shift. Mm-hmm. And so there's a bunch of findings in the report, but some of the findings that were interesting, that we found interesting was, IT folks were very quick and able to get bandwidth and work with their service providers to get bandwidth. It was more about the applications and the user training that was some of the challenge. So they were able to get bandwidths and some tools up in as fast as 15 to 30 days to meet that need. Certainly there were larger companies that had different challenges. We saw, at least from our install base, offshore and Asia Pacific manufacturing companies that needed quickly to get things going. So with that massive surge, it was interesting that the survey findings showed that almost a third, or a little more than a third, I think it was about 38%, felt that they were ill prepared. And again, I think that was more about tools, and it was also more about user awareness. So nearly 60% felt that the user awareness for how to work from home, best practices, that was not fully there, and that presented a risk. Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say, I wonder if some of that is because so many companies, there still have been a fair number of companies that really don't like the whole idea of their employees working from home. So I wonder if those, obviously those companies that kind of did embrace a work from home policy, at least on a part-time basis, were better prepared for something like this. Certainly not from a technology standpoint, but maybe just from a cultural mindset standpoint.
You're absolutely right. And it was interesting in the numbers, and we're seeing this trend in the Bay Area. We've had a number of companies announce that they're moving to more work from home flexibility, or moving to some permanent work from home. Twitter, Nationwide Insurance, right? A bunch of cross section of companies, not just tech companies, and so. We saw that also in the survey. So a good number of companies saw, I think it was about 38% saw that they saw increased productivity and other benefits. And a lot of those companies did not have a mindset of allowing work from home. Even financial services companies like Morgan Stanley, all these companies have made announcements that now that they're seeing the productivity gains, they're seeing the operational and cost benefits, and they're also have taken on this infrastructure, that now may be a time to actually move towards and change the work environment to a more mobile workforce, a work from home flexibility environment. 84% that said that's what they would anticipate moving forward beyond COVID. And that's a pretty huge number.
That is significant for sure. So actually, I wanted to ask you about that 38% number that you were talking about, those that actually experienced the massive productivity gains, at least in the first early days of this crisis. I've heard that from a number of organizations that their business was had never been better, basically, during this time. And I wonder, do you think that's just kind of a blip, maybe a byproduct of everybody kind of working in this new normal and just, being in survival mode, if you will? Or do you think that this is actually something that could be achieved long term in this new working from home paradigm where organizations are, a lot more open to the idea, even post COVID-19?
No, that's a great question. I think we are seeing that, at least in the interactions. We do have some of the largest companies in the world that use our solutions. And one interesting trend, I think this was also seen by other companies that are providing essential services, is secure access in general was a given. Some of the technology is more mature than others. And so it was less strategic because it was just felt, hey, we have this covered. Now with this business, a focus on business continuity, and then for some expansion, it's made the area or the category more strategic. And so in those engagements, what we're getting feedback is that people are actually looking at making moves and changes towards work from home, and they are realizing the productivity gains, but they also are seeing a lot of increased stress levels for their workers that have not had to deal with some of these things. And that's going to be a balance. Even in our company, we had for example, an Ask the CEO Anything with our entire management team. We used to do that on a monthly basis, just for transparency and communications. Now we're doing it on a weekly basis. And we're also doing it not only for the US, but we're switching our times every week. So we have international coverage as well. All these and we have a lot more engagement than we had to. And we have company, what we call company culture talent. They are way more engaged in doing very innovative things that they normally would have to do or would do physically, that now they're having to do remote. So I think it's definitely a different work shift. But again, in this study was very focused on some of the technology and what they were finding. In fact, we had this feedback. Generally speaking, a lot of folks, depending on their risk adversity, secure access tools, and this relates to zero trust, which is verify before you grant access.
Right.
A lot of folks would have very basic security requirements for people accessing remotely. And so endpoint compliance was not as strict for some companies, certainly for financial services or for some healthcare and some manufacturing, definitely for government, they were stricter than others. But the feedback we received, and actually this is also reflected in the report, they saw an increase in attack vectors for malware, 72% for malware, a high number for phishing, almost 60% for unauthorized user or device access, and more than a quarter, 44% for unpatched systems. A lot of this relates to endpoint security. That's your first issue. And what we found in this survey was that I think it was upwards of 65%, so nearly 3/4 of organizations now allow the use of personal and unmanaged devices to access their resources. And they had to do this for business resiliency purposes.
Sure.
But that definitely has an impact for security, for compliance. We saw a very big increase in phishing. And with endpoint compliance technology that's built into secure access tools, we can ensure that not only identity is who they say they are using multi-factor authentication, but we can ensure, hey, are they using a corporate device or a personal device? And we can further adjust policy conditionally based on that. Where are they located? What's the configuration? Are they running antivirus and anti-malware software that's been issued? Are they running personal firewall? So we can ensure the security posture, hygiene of that device before they access it. And then the other thing that we saw, so that's a trend we're seeing, is people are going to start ramping up that endpoint compliance capability. And then the second thing is all about user experience. So various tools offer different things. some folks, some tools allow for on-demand, or you actually invoke, for example, VPN technology as you need it. We saw a lot of our customers switch to always-on VPN. So as soon as someone turns on their computer, it's locked down and making sure that all data transmissions are secure and going through the proper networks. So those are some of the trends that we had seen and reflected in the report.
So going back to the compliance issue for just a second, there was a statistic in the report that said something like 63% said that this whole new working from home regime and just maybe just the speed at which they had to get their employees set up to work from home is going to impact their compliance mandates. So do you think that this is going to be something that is going to be kind of a long-term issue? And what do you think that the new reality is going to be for companies when we're talking about compliance and working from home?
Sure. I think with, and again, it depends on the organization, and every organization has to deal with both internal and regulatory compliance mandates, whether it's GDPR or PCI or GLBA. And it's also different classes of users or roles that actually access that, which is no news to your audience. Right. But I think having the tools now, it allows companies to have, they always have to have a balance for productivity and security. We always say secure access is more about productivity than protection, because without one, you don't have a need for the other. You can't be an impeding solution. You have to be an enabling solution. So I think for work from home, you're going to see more zero trust or conditional access being invoked. So it's going to depend on your role, where you are, what device you're using, what application you're going to. And it shouldn't matter whether it's on premise or whether it's in the cloud. It's really going to be a subset of all those things that make up a policy. But I think you will see stronger policies. And then at the same time, I think you're going to see a concerned effort, not only for security awareness training, but also to have a lot more self-service remediation or auto remediation capabilities that you probably didn't see before because because you didn't have as strong of a endpoint security and access security control.
So one other quick question, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. One of the things that the report kind of pointed out was the fact that more than half of companies, I think it was like 54%, said that this whole pandemic and the move to work from home accelerated their shift to migrate to the cloud migration strategies. That number seems pretty high to me, because I guess I thought that more companies were farther along the path in their cloud migration strategies. But judging from the report, it sounds like a lot of companies were still very much focused on on-premises solutions, or not really relying so much on the cloud. So what are your thoughts on that?
So at Pulse Secure, we do have a diverse clientele. And you have organizations in manufacturing, even in healthcare, financial services. They have applications and massive investment in legacy applications run off data centers or in particular private cloud. And so certain of these applications maybe in some stage of migration. Some of those are just not migrating because of maybe data protection obligations, or maybe the nature, complexity of those tools. And then other applications, it's a mix. Other applications in terms of Salesforce automation or IT HR services, or certainly collaboration tools or file sharing, those certainly are being more moved or sourced from the cloud. And this calls for hybrid IT. So in secure access, we see a trend that says if you are thinking that if you're a medium to very large enterprise, most likely it's not everything goes to the cloud. It's going to be a fairly long migration process. You need a flexibility in terms of tool sets. And actually companies are moving to platforms to get that interoperability and that integration. We sell suites as well, but they're really doing that because they need to have one set of policy, a unified policy that can apply not only to the user types and their devices, but also to support the applications that may exist in a private cloud, in a data center, in a public cloud. And so that means that you need solutions that, if you go one extreme and say, okay, I only want application access and I only want layer 7. The reality is most IT folks know that you need layer 3, layer 4. You may have to have specialized emergency access to the underlying system. You may need to support virtual desktop, and actually a lot of these companies had workers that physically were on-premise that are moved off-premise and need to act as if they're back on-premise. So it's this type of flexibility that we're seeing. So in terms of the data, we're certainly seeing a massive, bigger accelerated pickup. But the majority of companies today are hybrid IT oriented. I think the one surprising thing that we saw is that we definitely saw a surge in business like other companies that were supporting essential services and secure access in particular. What was interesting is that, and this goes to the trend of companies moving towards more work from home, remote access, or permanent remote access demand, that 55% anticipated increased budget in work from home security. And this is post the pandemic. So that number is based on people looking beyond May. And so again, those things relate. If you have folks that are positive about moving the transition and see the economic and productivity benefits, it's no surprise that they're also seeing higher security risks. And so they're going to need to beef up that security.
Excellent. Excellent. So if folks want to get a copy of the survey, where would they go?
They can go right to our website, www.pulsesecure.com. Pulsesecure.net. And if folks want to, I don't know if you do cuts or not, or if you do editing.
Yeah, we can do that.
Let me just take that question
Sure.
right there. So if companies want to get the full report, they can go to www.pulsesecure.net. And it's a great read. It's a quick download. There's also an infographic, and it has some really good practical information to get peer insights. What are your peers doing?
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Scott, thank you so much for taking the time and walking me through the report. I really do appreciate it. Lots of really interesting statistics in it. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, guys, stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
All right, folks, that's going to wrap up our show for today, June 2nd. Hey, I know it's a little bit crazy out there for a lot of us. Stay safe, stay well, stay strong, stay tech strong. We'll see you tomorrow. This is Alan Schimmel. We're out.
you.